talking down the back. Okay, welcome to part 2. Edwina, if you're handing me, are you asking a question? Are you waiting? Yeah, great. Okay, so Dublin, you've kind of got nothing. You know, I know you play football or Gaelic or whatever, but the story of Irish rock and of DIY promotion becomes far more interesting when we move beyond Dublin. And there's someone who sent their best wishes to everyone here. Paul Charles, who might be known to a lot of you. Paul Charles from Marrowfelt, emigrated to London, managed a kind of a hippie prog rock band, and then he started booking bands. And someone at UA Records said to him, "We've got a band and no one will book them, will you come and see them?" So he did, and it was the Buzzcocks. And then he started booking Gang of Four. He started booking Human League, and now, to this day, he books Elvis Costello and Christy Moore. But he got in touch with the entertainment officers around the country because no one would come to play in Ireland after the Miami massacre. The country shut down as a live music venue. And Paul went to bands and said, "You'll be safe. You can play in Belfast, you can play in Portstewart, you can do a circuit of Ireland," and it had to be a full circuit or it wasn't economically viable. You had to do 6 gigs. And famously he asked the Stranglers, "Will you come to Ireland?" And they said, "No, we're scared. And we'll only go if you go with us." So he had to hold the Stranglers' hands and come, and you know, he's described it in interviews that they were lovely people to travel with, they were well read, he had a great time. And then he brought the Clash, the Jam. And all of that first wave of punk bands came. But they were only made possible by people like Paddy and Ber here, not specifically, but people around the country who said, "Yeah, I can do Limerick on a Tuesday night, and then Dublin might have got the Sunday, and then Cork might have got the Saturday." But it meant that for the first time in Irish history, the bands that you would see on Top of the Pops were playing in venues, young bands who might only have existed for about 6, 12, 18 months before becoming very well known. And that completely changed the landscape of live music in Ireland. So, Ber, like, you were there quite early on in Limerick, and you were going to see gigs before you got involved. So what kind of music inspired you or made you want to jump up and down?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Well, very first of all, you mentioned a band called the Buzzcocks. And my first introduction, I love music. I grew up with music, and I was small and very young. So when I was about 15, 16, I couldn't get into this amazing rock club that was in the Glenwood Hotel in Limerick, run by a guy called Billy McGrath, who I don't know where Billy is tonight, and I wasn't able to get in, so I went to him and says, "Can I be a photographer? If I take pictures, can I go and see the bands?" And he says, "Yes." And that's how I got involved in the whole works. And then I worked with Brendan Murray, and one of the gigs I worked with was what was the band we just mentioned? Buzzcocks. And lots of more, but I also remember then I met a guy called John Ryan, and John Ryan said, because I did a bit, I used to work backstage in the big Savoy Theatre, and I remember you weren't able to get to the front that easy, so if you're on backstage, you're stuck there. And the band, one of the bands was kicking, well, particularly one of the members of a band was kicking up. And I was only a kid, and I was looking at those dressing rooms on one side, and Brendan Murray said, "Oh, don't use those dressing rooms. The band last night pissed and shed all over them." And then this guy comes over and he says, "Well, I don't want to be in the same dressing room as the rest of the members. So I just got annoyed with him, and there was a guy called Morrissey, and a band called the Smiths, and they were nice. He wasn't so nice. I don't know what you think of it, but that was my whole introduction. Then I remember doing Tin Lizzy. I was doing the posters just for Tin Lizzy. My parents wouldn't allow me to go to the gig, but they allowed me to go to the after party. And I remember saying to Faye, I don't know if anybody knows Faye, but he's in the business still, from what I gather. I remember I didn't know Faye at the time, and I said, "Oh, is that poor man a diabetic?" And he said, "Yeah," because I was too innocent. And that's my whole introduction. And then I met a guy in a cafe, and he said, "Well, you know a little bit about bands. I'm out in NIHE, there's nothing happening." They had an Ents officer, who was a guy called Barry Moore, who'd be Luca Bloom, he's known as now, Christy's brother. But he got kicked out of college after 6 months. So I went in to start things on a percentage basis, and then when it became into 83, I started, and bit by bit, but I was an entertainment manager as opposed to an officer. So I was in a new university, and there was another one in DCU who were our cousins, our poor cousins we used to call them. But we had to kind of develop from nothing, and Edwina talked about budgets. We just didn't have a budget. We had to make it. But bit by bit, you could develop because you're an entertainment manager and absolutely love music. And I put on crazy amount of stuff. Like I even brought a list to give to the lads of the amount of years and the amount of gigs. And eventually, when it went into the 90s, I was doing, on average, between 27 to 32 events a week. Now, some of those events were sport events because I was mad into the sport as well. But I was mad into getting students just kicking footballs and bouncing basketballs just for the fun of it. And I also did that, and I showed films and did all sorts of stuff. Just to take it into context, last week was Rag Week in Limerick, or they call it Charity Week. The 2 full-time Ents officers put on 4 events, and they outsourced it to another company. That's it for the entire semester. So I would have done more in one day. And basically, all the bands are talking about, I would have, and we mentioned Paul Charles, myself, and we decided to set up a college circuit. Myself and my colleague over there, we went over to London and we met the agents and we met Paul Charles. We always remember Paul Charles because he was the nicest. A lot of them didn't want to hear us because they said, "Oh, we just deal with MCD." And we went in and we did the men that didn't camp. We organised tours. And I remember, and that continued on, and I was part of the entertainment managers in the UK who were very nice to us. And they wanted us they brought us to a private show to see bands, and we'd seen a band and we looked at them, myself and Shep, I think was, Mom said it was Shep from the University of Ulster, and the 2 guys sat down. We thought they were good, but after meeting them, we said, "Nah, we're not going to take them. We just couldn't be dealing with this shit." That was Oasis. So a lot of the good ones were turned down, but probably, and even back in the day, I did with Brendan Murray, we did a show with U2, and then they rang to look for a gig at the college, and I think my last words were more, because I didn't like their attitude. I said, "You'll never play Limerick again," and that was it. But as I said, I was young, and then eventually I worked with a band called, obviously, I went into a studio. I was asked by some guy to teach kids art, and I says, "I'll teach them the art of creating music." And there was a studio called Heretic in Limerick, great facility, and I went in, I heard a band called the Cranberries. I says, "They sound all right." So I had it all booked up for the semester, and I says, I put them in as support to a band called the Hitchers, and besides paying back to the audience and whatever, I could see promise, but it wasn't that. The students said to me, "Oh, could you bring them back again?" And I brought them back in headliners and did a load of other shows with them. And believe it or not, I videoed most of that, so I own all that material, and even if you look, everybody go on to Zombie, the lyric version, I own some of the material in that, so I get a little bit of, a small bit of dough out of that, but and even even when COVID came, I would always help students, no matter what, and I still do. When 3 students came up to me and said, oh, and I knew one of them, Eddie was his name, I knew him well because he worked in the stables, which is one of the on-campus bar, which I got built, made sure it got built and whatever, and now it's still going. And I said, do you do your own stuff? And I said, yeah, and I said, send me a video. And they sent me a video, and I was on Twitter, and I said, feck it, I'll throw it up on Twitter and pass it on to some people. And within minutes, people said, do you have a number for him? And then, and that's called a band called Kingfisher. And so, I think when you get to our stage where we have contacts, when you can help somebody out, go and do it. Because I was helped out by Billy McGrath and Brendan Murray back in the day. Always help them out, always do them a turn. That's. Sorry, I'll keep talking, you're a bit further. Sorry, Mike. Sorry, Paddy.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And, Ber will be here doing a 24-hour talk tomorrow.
Yeah. Sorry, 48.
48 hours, and the title of his speech is Why All of the Bands from Manchester Suck.
I like the Liverpool bands.
Yeah.
I've actually seen his list.
Yeah.
I've seen the list. It exists, and let's just say it's a hefty tome.
Yeah, this is so important, is that, you mentioned you weren't an Ents officer, you were an entertainment manager, so you had a slightly different role, and we'll get back to what that meant, because it often meant that you mentored people who were just new on the job, and you were also creating contacts. And to me, if I take what you did to help bands from Limerick, including the Cranberries, they have a very different history, because most of their early gigs were gigs that you put on for them. And Paddy, how did you get involved? Were you into music beforehand, or did college just present you with an opportunity?
Belfast boy, as a nipper, every weekend in our house there was sing-song. So I was raised on Hank Williams Sr., Johnny Cash, the Clancy Brothers. My dad had a friend with an acoustic guitar. There was a very odd bottle of stout, but it was mostly pots of tea and kernel cake, and every weekend. So that's what I was raised on. Loved my music. Punk came along, everything, the Pistols, Clash, Stranglers, everything. I just inhaled every bit of it. Went to college, and the opportunity presented itself to. I very quickly realised I had neither the faculty nor the knack to be a musician. So I just said, listen, I just desperately want to be involved. So I said, I'll go the other side of the curtain, on the other side of the stage. So, and
that was in Carlow?
That was in Carlow RTC, yeah.
Right.
So we had 1,200 students, and every weekend I was in the underground. I was up at Dance Line with Pete and Eddie. I was up in the Bag of Inn. So my favourite bands at the time, just before as I became Ents Officer, were A House, Something Happens, Light a Big Fire, Aslan. I gave them all their very first gigs outside of Dublin. Every single one of those bands. 3 of them I'm still in touch with, and 3 of them still exist. A House played last weekend.
Fantastic. And so, can you trace any of that to that moment of finding and discovering punk and that attitude? Did that make you just want to listen to music, or did it make you want to do something?
I was like a sponge with punk. I was totally like a sponge with punk. As I say, I inhaled it. Every lyric sheet I could get my hands on. Let's just say my academia suffered at the hands of my grow for the punk. But it's something that's stayed with me to this day. I still find those records very invigorating.
And you're famous for being a Clash fanatic and a great supporter of the Clash. Why Carlow? You're from Belfast. How did you get to Carlow?
We moved to Naas, County Kildare. There was a small bit of hassle up around West Belfast where we were living at the time, and so my parents got us the hell out of Dodge. Went to Newbridge College Secondary School and then on to Carlow RTC.
And was there an Ents officer in place when you arrived, or did you invent the role?
There was an active student union there, yeah, a very active student union. I went on to be student union president and a USI officer after, actually. So, so it was a very active student union, very well supported student union. We had a small little, 300 cap pub called Archie's where all those bands played for the first time. I remember we were talking, earlier guests were talking about budgets, so for 80 punts back in the day, and we're talking about 84, 85, something happens with Landdown in a van with a PA, 4 300 watt cans and a couple of stands, all their backline and all the band in one van, and they'd set up and they got 80 quid for it.
Fantastic. And what did you put on discos as well, or was live music your thing? And did you put on a gig that I went to with Light a Big Fire in the boat on the Liffey?
Yes,
okay.
I did. Yeah.
So,
Light a Big Fire were the first band of that genre to kind of kick into the next gear and play bigger shows and bigger production values and stuff. And I was all about that. I loved all that, and I'm still doing it 40 years later. But it was just right place, right time, I think, and the students got it. The students supported the students' union. They supported the gigs big time. We did that legendary Pogues tour, the first Pogues tour back in the day.
Yeah, how chilled was that?
That was fucking carnage. is all I could say. I did promise to tell you the story about. So, the Ritz Ballroom was the rag ball that year, and a couple of members of the Pogues have written books, have mentioned that they were afraid for their lives, that the punters were getting so out of control. It was a rag ball. Everybody's pissed up. 600 people. Elvis Costello had just started dating Coyte Reardon at the time, and he did front of house sound and took time to put his arm around me at the end of the show and tell me these naughty words: "That PA of yours is a fucking joke." But so 600 people went to the show. 6 months later, everybody's singing "Dirty Old Town." Half of Carlow claimed to have been at the show. Thousands of people claimed to have been there.
Yeah, and when the members of the Pogues wrote their autobiographies, they remembered that gig and that PA and the fear for their life. This is a band that were used to hand-to-hand combat, but playing in Carlow was almost the death of them.
The next time I got to work with the Pogues was with Light a Big Fire a couple of years later, and they did a 3-night stand in the Hammersmith Paddy, and Light a Big Fire opened for them, and that was equally scary. And I'm 18 stone, 6'4" from West Belfast, and kind of don't really handle intimidation very well. But I was scared shitless at all those gigs. I really was. It was powerful energy,
Yeah, and again, just to put in context, the Pogues' first headlining tour, it's Mick McCollum and the people that we're talking to tonight, and they're students.
And it was 400 punts for the Pogues.
So, like Edwina, you go on, you stay in the music industry, so how did your career develop from when you were doing Ents?
After I left USI, obviously my student activities, and I went to NIHE Dublin and took over from that man down there, Mr. O'Mahony. NIHE Dublin, before it became DC, long before it became DCU. And then after that 1 year, I had a contract there. It was a member of staff. It didn't really, the students were more interested in queuing up for the library than they were for tickets for my gigs. So
scholars.
So I got out of Dodge after a year, and I went to work for Paddy, the promoter.
And who was Pat bringing over at that time?
I went straight for that into a Billy Connolly tour, and Billy had just given up the gargle, and so the night one of a 6-night stand in the Olympia Theatre, I'm at the dressing room door number 1, and Billy's inside with Pamela. He's given up the sauce, and Barney McKenna and Ronnie Drew come up to the door, and they start to push me out of the way, and I said, sorry, no chance that you're not getting into the dressing room, sir. We're just picking up Billy to go for the few points, so get out of my way. I said, sorry, not happening. You can hear Billy howling with laughter in the dressing room. And the nicest thing those two men said to me tonight was, who do you think you are, you lanky Nordy prick? True story. And these were my heroes.
Yeah, there's a lot of love in the Irish music scene. You know, and never meet your heroes. But so you work for Paddy Egan, and by the way, Mary, my friend Mary is here, and this is a good story. Paddy put on a new Model Army gig in McGonagall's, and I got in free for it as the DJ. Now, anyone who knows my DJ skills will realise why that was the end of my career. But I remember that very fondly. So, was that for Paddy Egan, or did you?
That was for Pat.
Okay.
Yeah, that was for Pat. So I would have repped all the shows. I was a young guy, so I would have gone out around the country with his international acts, and he was had a lot of international. He would have done, everybody from Eric Clapton to Sting, lots of big stuff, and I would be the promoter rep on tour on those shows as a kid, as a youngster, and then I ended up tour managing.
And tour management brought you to Canada, like you went on the road with
Sam Roberts and Kathleen Edwards. That was a deal with Eggplant Entertainment in Toronto, so I handled all their European art, all their Canadian artists when they came to Europe.
Fantastic. And Ber, just, because I'm obsessed, clearly, punk. Where were you buying records, and what records were you buying, and were you doing what Paddy was doing of coming up to see the bands in Dublin? But both of these people and me, we're off that stage where, if you went to Carlow, if you went to college in Limerick, you weren't going up and down to Dublin, every night. You were there. So, yeah.
Where did I see the bands? Often you normally have the summer, and in the summer, I think what was very important was the English promoters or the English officers were full time, and they used to have showcases where I could go and see the acts and the whole thing. But I was just thinking there, Edwina mentioned, putting bands up. That is happening to me all the time. I do remember Ned's Atomic Dustbin were absolutely fantastic. And I put them up. I got up late, of course, the next day, and my house was spotless. And my house is never spotless, still not spotless. They cleaned everything. And there was them, and then I had a stand-up comedian who was on the Tube. I can't remember his name, but he's one of the presenters of the Tube, and he helped him. Yeah, and Billy Connolly, I would have done after that. Pat, a great guy to work with. I promoted Billy Connolly on behalf of Pat in the university, and we didn't even have a proper venue. But I was shitting it because Pádraig Bohr in Galway says, "Ber, this guy's an awful guy to deal with." And I said, "Oh shit." So they arrived in, and there wasn't a proper venue. As far as I was concerned, I was getting this big act. I'm going to put him on anyway. And I went in, and he bent over, and he couldn't stop laughing. And I put him on, and at the end of the show, I said, "Billy, is there any chance to come out and meet the volunteer students through the chairs?" And he came out, and he went down, he was chatting to him. And then he said, which is something, this is the guy I was scared shitless of. Then he said to the students, he said, to his tour manager, it was another guy, he wasn't as nice as this guy, man, but the other tour manager, he says, "We'll go out to Jory's." The man said, "Well, we'll be booked," and he said, "Ring him back up, pack the bus with the students, brought them all out for a meal and drinks. Meanwhile, of course, I had to get the exam hall with 1,000 seats back together on my own.
Fantastic. And you know, just to wrap up this section, the Cranberries, like, I went down to one of the gigs in the stables. They were playing to 10 people. It was when Dolores used to turn her back on the audience. You know, it was very...
It was a bit more than 10 because I have the video of it. But it wasn't much more.
You know, so you saw them from the start.
Yeah.
Like, did you think that's a band that's going to sell 30 million records? Like
I did 2 stables gigs with them, but then took let's say, put them into our Thursday series where we normally get a crowd anyway. And I can remember the numbers of every gig. There was 950 people at that. And it was at that gig I thought, these have a chance. And you know what? I'll put them on again and again and again. And I put them on the gig where they were signed for the record company, etc. And believe it or not, I still have the video, because I was forever videoing stuff. So I still have the video of that. I found them, Dolores was very quiet at the time, and, you know, but eventually, you know, she got to know, and she was very funny. She was great. And eventually, you know, as it went on, they did whatever, and, you know, I did their homecoming show, which was massive. And then I introduced them to the guys in the orchestra in UL, and they used that as a rehearsal space. So I still have a connection with the band and with Dolores' brother. In fact, in COVID, her niece, I recorded her niece and helped her out to perform songs and stuff like that. As I say, always help somebody out, you know.
And you know, what a positive note to end it. So thanks to Ber Angley and Paddy McPoland.
Thank you.
You know, because we're ahead of time, we'll take a 3-minute break. But if you see Ber